If one day you discovered that the person you loved for half your life didn't just betray you, but had been living an entire other family behind your back, what would you do? My name is Margaret Davis, and I am 75 years old. I am no longer young, but some memories cut deeper than any knife, and that memory begins with a single birthday card. For 13 years, every single month, my husband Thomas Davis sent money to what he called his wounded brother in Texas. I believed him. I believed in his story of war and the brotherhood between soldiers and the tenderness of a man who carried the scars of Vietnam. I even helped him seal the envelopes, write the addresses, sometimes tucking a note inside. "Hope your brother is healing." Never once did I question him. Not once did I imagine that kindness could be a cover for betrayal. Until that cold winter morning in 1981. I was doing the laundry, reaching into the pocket of his coat, when I found a card, blue faded with a faint scent of perfume. I thought it was just another company greeting. But when I opened it, the world shifted beneath my feet. The handwriting was gentle, curved, almost musical. It said, "To my dearest husband and the best father in the world, love Sylvia and Emma." I stood frozen. My fingers trembled as if I had just touched the edge of truth. His wounded brother wasn't a brother at all. He had a wife, a daughter, and an entire life I knew nothing about. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't tear the card apart or throw it into the fire. Instead, I folded it carefully as if I were holding evidence of a storm yet to come. That evening, he came home as usual, hung his coat, kissed my forehead, and said softly, "I'm tired, honey. It was a long drive today." I smiled. "I know, you should rest." But inside me, something lit up a small, quiet flame, not of rage, but of clarity. I didn't say a word. I simply began to watch, to listen, to remember. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I never knew if I was cold enough for that, but I knew one thing for sure: the truth always finds its way out. And from the very moment I held that card in my hand, I was no longer the gentle wife of Thomas Davis. I became something else, the keeper of a secret and the storyteller of my own life. Because sometimes it doesn't take fire or fury to destroy a lie. It only takes a woman who finally opens her eyes. After I found that birthday card, I couldn't stop my mind from wandering back to the very beginning, to the day we met. Because sometimes the ending only makes sense when you go back to where it all began. It was the summer of 1968 in a small Kansas town where everyone knew everyone. I was 17, the daughter of a mechanic. My father's hands were always black with oil. My mother's apron always smelled like soap and cinnamon. We didn't have much, but we had laughter and a porch swing that creaked like an old song at sunset. That afternoon, the sky had turned the color of pewter. A summer storm was building thick clouds, thunder somewhere far away. I was driving my father's old Ford pickup home when one of the tires gave out with a hiss and a sigh. Rain started to fall, first gentle, then fierce, like a sheet of glass breaking over the world. I pulled over by the dirt road near Miller's farm, heart pounding, unsure what to do. And then I saw him, a tall young man in a worn army jacket, hair damp from the rain boots splashing through puddles. He walked straight toward me, as if he'd been waiting for that very moment. Without a word, he knelt by the tire, his hands moving fast, sure practiced. He smelled of rain, gasoline, and something else, the kind of quiet strength that makes a young girl trust too easily. When he finished, he looked up and smiled, a smile so warm it almost stopped the rain. "You owe me a pie someday," he said. I laughed, nervous, shy, foolish. "A pie, I can manage that," I replied. He stood, wiped his hands, and the thunder rolled behind him like an introduction. That was Thomas Davis, the man who had just come back from Vietnam trying to fix trucks instead of people. A man who carried his past in silence and wore his charm like armor. I saw him again 3 days later at the small diner near Main Street. He was sitting alone, drinking coffee, reading the local paper as if he belonged everywhere and nowhere. When our eyes met, he tapped the empty seat across from him. "Still owe me that pie," he said, so I sat down. That was how it started, simple like rain meeting dust. He told me he'd served 2 years overseas, that he'd lost friends, that the world out there was bigger and colder than I could imagine. I told him I'd never been farther than Topeka. He laughed, said I reminded him of home, and somehow that made me believe I could be his home. The next months were a blur of late-night drives, picnics by the lake, and long letters filled with promises young hearts had no right to make. Thomas would look at me with those quiet soldier's eyes and say, "You're the calm I never had." And I, naive and full of dreams, thought love alone could heal a man's ghosts. We married 5 months later. A small ceremony, borrowed dress paper flowers, and a radio playing Can't Help Falling in Love. He kissed me under a sky still healing from war, and I remember thinking, this is forever. But mothers always know. That night my mother took my hands in hers. Her palms were rough from years of washing, but her voice was soft as the wind. "Don't marry a man who's always leaving," she said. "Distance changes people, Maggie. Sometimes it changes them so much they forget where they came from." I smiled too and loved to listen. "He'll come back to me," I said. "He's a good man." She sighed, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "Even good men get lost." I didn't understand then. At 17, love feels like armor. You believe it can protect you from everything: loneliness, fear, even time itself. But love, when it's blind, can be the most dangerous thing of all. The first year of our marriage was beautiful. Thomas worked at a truck repair station just outside town. He would come home with grease on his hands and a joke ready for the dinner table. We'd sit by the radio, listening to old country songs, laughing about how one day we'd have a house with white curtains and a backyard full of daisies. I used to trace the lines on his palm, pretending I could read our future there. He'd laugh and say, "As long as you're in it, I'm already home." I believed him completely. But even then, there were shadows I refused to see. The way his eyes drifted when someone mentioned Texas. The way letters arrived with no return address. The way he'd leave before dawn saying, "Extra shift, long route." I told myself that's what love means, to trust without asking too much. Now looking back, I realized that the storm didn't begin the day I found the birthday card. It began right there on that rainy road in 1968, when a 17-year-old girl smiled at a man with kind eyes and believed his world would never hide a lie. If only I had known that one small act of kindness, changing a tire in the rain, would change the rest of my life. By 1972, our small house smelled of baby powder milk and morning coffee. Life had grown noisy, the kind of noise that makes a home feel alive. Our first son, John, was 5. Our daughter, Sarah, was 3. And the youngest, Daniel, had just arrived that spring. 3 children, 3 tiny reasons to believe in forever. Thomas worked as a truck driver, hauling goods across state lines. His routes took him away for days, sometimes weeks. Each time he left, I'd pack sandwiches, fold his shirts, and tuck small notes inside his lunchbox, little reminders that someone was waiting at home. I used to watch his truck disappear down the dusty Kansas road, the morning sun catching the back of his mirror. I'd whisper, "Come home safe," and for a long time he always did. One night after the children had fallen asleep, he sat at the kitchen table counting bills, sealing an envelope with quiet care. I asked gently, "Is it for the company?" He shook his head. "No, for Mark, my brother. He lost a leg in the war, needs monthly treatment." His voice carried a kind of sorrow I didn't question. He spoke of Mark as if the man were a piece of his past that still bled. And I, remembering all the scars that war leaves behind, believed every word. From that night on, the routine never changed. Once a month, always the first Monday, Thomas would sit at that same kitchen table, fill out a check, seal it in an envelope, and write one word on the front, "Texas." Sometimes he'd sigh before licking the stamp. Sometimes he'd hold the envelope a moment longer, as if it carried something heavier than money. Then he'd drop it into the outgoing mail and leave for his next route. I admired him for it, I told my friends at church. My husband still sends money to his wounded brother. Not everyone would do that these days, and they'd nod, saying, "You married a good man, Maggie." I thought so too. In my heart, I was proud to be the wife of a man who remembered family. Years passed in the rhythm of departures and returns. Every goodbye sounded the same: the hum of the truck, the wave through the window, the promise I'll be home Sunday. And every Sunday night, I'd set 4 plates instead of 5, just in case he didn't make it back in time. The children grew. John started school. Sarah learned to braid her hair. Daniel took his first steps, clutching the corner of my apron. Each new milestone I wished Thomas could see. But when he called, his voice was always warm, always loving. "Tell Johnny I'll bring him a toy truck. Tell Sarah I miss her singing. Tell Daniel Daddy loves him." And after every call, I'd take out his letters to Mark, neatly stacked in the drawer proof. I thought of a man's goodness. But slowly, little things began to tug at me. In 13 years of envelopes, there was never one reply. No postcard, no phone call, not even a photograph. When John asked once, "Mom, when will Uncle Mark visit us?" I smiled and said, "He's sick, sweetheart. Hospitals don't let people travel much." Thomas's answer, exactly. Still, sometimes late at night, I'd catch him staring out the window after a trip, a cigarette between his fingers, his eyes somewhere far away. If I asked, "Was it a hard week?" he'd nod without looking at me. "Mark's not doing well. Maybe next month I'll go see him." He never did. There was always another route, another reason, another promise, and I, ever the believer, kept his world stitched together with trust. Sometimes when I think back, I realize I wasn't blind, just kind. There's a difference. Kindness makes you see the best in people, even when the truth is standing right in front of you, waiting to be seen. In those years, I never doubted him. Not when he forgot birthdays, not when his paychecks grew thinner, not even when he started keeping a separate account for expenses. I told myself it was responsibility, not secrecy, because I wanted to believe that love, once tested by distance, and war could survive anything. If someone had told me then that all those envelopes were feeding another life, I wouldn't have believed them. I would have defended him, the man who fixed my tire in the rain, the man who promised me a forever made of gentle words and steady hands. But life has a cruel way of showing you what you refuse to see, and the truth has patience. It waits quietly inside letters, inside pockets, inside the silence you keep pretending not to notice. For 13 years, those envelopes traveled south to Texas, carrying not just money, but trust, month after month, until the day one birthday card came back north and shattered everything I thought I knew. There's a strange comfort in routine. It tricks you into thinking everything is fine, that love once steady will stay that way forever. But sometimes, the smallest habits hide the darkest secrets. By the late 70s, our lives had settled into quiet patterns. Thomas on the road, me at home, the children growing tall, their laughter filling every corner of the house. From the outside, we looked like the picture of an ordinary family. Inside, I had stopped asking questions. Maybe that was my mistake. Thomas rarely spoke of Mark anymore. At first, he used to mention his brother's progress, how the doctors were hopeful, how the therapy was working. Then the stories grew shorter until they vanished altogether like smoke from a fire long gone cold. Every December, when the streets filled with lights and the church bells sang carols through the snow, I'd ask him softly, "Will you be home for Christmas this year?" And he'd smile tired. "You know how the roots are, Maggie." "I'll try." He never made it. Year after year, the children would hang his stocking by the fireplace, writing his name in glitter glue, and I'd tell them, "Daddy's helping Santa deliver gifts to other kids tonight." They believed it. Maybe I did too. The first winter he missed Christmas, I told myself it was work. The second, I told myself it was duty. By the third, I stopped telling myself anything at all. Silence had become easier than disappointment. One evening, while wrapping presents, I asked him the question that had been circling my mind for years. "Thomas, why don't we visit your brother?" He didn't look up. He just said, "Hospital rules, no visitors." A short answer, sharp metallic like a door slamming shut. I wanted to ask more. Which hospital? How long has he been there? But his tone built a wall between us, and I, too gentle to climb it, stayed quiet. He reached for his coat, kissed my cheek, and was gone before the question could take another breath. That night, I watched the snow fall through the window, each flake landing on the sill like a little piece of truth, cold, fragile, gone before you could touch it. I remember whispering to myself, maybe some things are better left unknown. But deep down, I already knew that ignorance never protects you. It only delays the pain. Years folded into one another. The kids grew into teenagers. John built model airplanes. Sarah wrote poems, and little Daniel learned how to fix engines just like his father. Sometimes I'd catch him sitting on the porch, waiting for the sound of that familiar truck rumble. When it didn't come, he'd pretend he wasn't disappointed. Children learn early how to hide heartbreak. I tried to keep the house bright, to fill it with laughter, to make his absence feel smaller. But there were nights I'd lie awake the other side of the bed, cold, listening to the wind push against the windows, and I'd wonder how many miles away he really was. There were signs, of course. There always are. A whiff of perfume that wasn't mine lingering on his collar. A receipt from a cafe 2 states south where he supposedly never went. An unfamiliar ringtone when his second phone buzzed in the glove compartment. Each time I swallowed the doubt, wrapped it tight in reason, and called it trust. One night after he'd gone to sleep, I stood in the doorway watching him breathe. His face looked peaceful, too peaceful, like a man who'd built a life sturdy enough to keep his secrets safe. I wanted to wake him, to ask him everything I'd been too afraid to say. But I didn't, because sometimes silence feels like loyalty, and I was still loyal even when I shouldn't have been. The years between 1978 and 1981 blurred together like the edge of a photograph, familiar but out of focus. The more distant he became, the harder I worked to hold the family together. I told myself that love was patience, that faith could fix anything. But patience without truth is just slow heartbreak. And then came 1981. A year I would never forget. A year that began like any other laundry on Mondays, bills on Thursdays, the sound of the mail truck every afternoon at 3. I remember that particular day, the air outside sharp with winter, the smell of pine still lingering after Christmas. I was cleaning his coat, the dark one with the stitched elbow patch. My hand slipped into the inside pocket and touched something smooth, folded paper thin. I pulled it out, a card, pale blue edges worn, a faint scent of perfume, and as I opened it, time seemed to stop. The handwriting was neat, almost tender. It said, "To my dearest husband and the best father in the world, love, Sylvia and Emma." The world around me fell silent. Even the ticking clock seemed to hold its breath. For 13 years, I had believed in an imaginary brother, a wounded soldier who never existed. And now in my hands was the truth, a truth wrapped in pastel paper and perfume, the kind of truth that doesn't just hurt, it unravels everything. I didn't cry, not yet. I simply stood there, the card trembling between my fingers, realizing that every mile he'd driven, every Christmas he'd missed, every envelope he'd sealed wasn't duty, it was deception. That day, without meaning to, I became a different woman. One who no longer waited by the window. One who no longer prayed for answers because the answer was already here. And it smelled like perfume. After that birthday card, the world didn't collapse all at once. It tilted slowly, quietly, like a picture frame sliding off its nail. Nothing looked different on the surface, but every sound, every word, every breath in that house felt suddenly out of place. I went about my days as if nothing had changed. Breakfast for the kids, laundry, church on Sundays. But every time the phone rang, my heart flinched. Every time the mail arrived, my hands shook. I had begun living inside a silence I no longer trusted. Thomas left for another route the following week. He kissed my cheek, told me he'd be in Dallas for a few days. His smile was the same, his words gentle, but his eyes wouldn't stay still. When the door closed behind him, I stood there listening to the sound of the truck fading into distance, and for the first time I didn't feel the comfort of routine. I felt the echo of a lie. 3 days later, the phone rang. It was just past noon, the house quiet, except for the ticking clock. I picked up. "Mrs. Davis, this is Harper Trucking. Is Thomas available?" I frowned. "He's already in Dallas, isn't he, on a delivery?" There was a pause. Then the man's voice came back confused. "Impossible, ma'am. He hasn't picked up any load this week." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The clock kept ticking louder, as if counting the seconds it took for my world to tilt completely. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "Yes, ma'am. We've been trying to reach him. His truck has been off route for days." Off route. 2 words that can mean so many things: a detour, a breakdown, or a betrayal. My hand tightened around the receiver until my knuckles turned white. "Thank you," I said and hung up. The silence that followed was unbearable. I walked to his desk in the corner of the living room, the one I had never touched without asking. A tidy stack of papers, a silver pen, a ledger of routes and mileage, all perfectly normal until I pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside was a folder I had never seen before, marked Personal. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Bank receipts, statements, not the joint account we shared, another one under his name alone. And in the back of the folder, an envelope. On the front was written in blue ink, S. Parker, Houston. The same handwriting as the birthday card. For a moment I just stared at it, my heart thudding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I slid the paper out. Inside was a bank receipt for regular transfers, monthly payments to the same account. 13 years of lies documented in black and white. At the bottom corner was a scribbled address, Parker Atelier, Houston, Texas. An atelier, a fashion shop, not a hospital, not a clinic, a place where people stitched fabric and dreams, not prosthetics and scars. I remember sitting back in the chair, the room spinning slowly. Everything around me was the same, the family photos, the curtains I had sewn myself, the sound of John and Sarah arguing over homework in the next room. Only I was different now. Something inside me had shifted from blind love to cold clarity. For hours I sat there staring at that address. Houston. It was more than 500 miles away, far enough for secrets to stay hidden, but not far enough for me to ignore them any longer. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was for charity. Maybe Mark was an alias. Maybe there was a good reason for all this. But the truth was simple: good men don't need aliases, and love shouldn't require so many maybes. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the wind slide through the trees, thinking about every mile he had driven, every excuse I had believed. By morning, the decision was made. When you spend years believing in someone else's story, there comes a moment when you must write your own. For me, that moment came with a map on the kitchen table, a half-packed suitcase, and a heart that refused to stay blind. I left a note for the children with my sister in Wichita. "Mom has to check something. I'll be back soon." Then I folded the bank receipt, slipped it into my purse, and looked at my reflection one last time. The woman staring back wasn't a housewife anymore. She was a detective of her own life. Before leaving, I stood by our bedroom door and took a deep breath. The air smelled of his aftershave of every morning I had believed in him. I whispered, "I'm done waiting for truth to find me." Then I locked the door and walked out. The bus ride to Texas was long and quiet. Miles of empty fields, billboards, and a sky that looked too wide for my thoughts. I watched the landscape change from the brown of Kansas to the red dust of Texas, and with each mile my fear shrunk while my resolve grew. When the bus finally pulled into Houston, the sun was high, the heat thick, and the air smelled of cotton and diesel. I held the piece of paper with the address tightly in my hand. Parker Atelier, neat handwriting, no mistake. I walked 3 blocks until I found it a 2-story yellow house with white trim, a sign above the door that read, "Sylvia Parker Tailoring." There were flowers in the window, fresh pink, alive, the kind of details a woman adds to a home, not a workshop. I stood on the sidewalk, heart pounding, the wind hot against my face. After 13 years of trust, after countless letters to a brother who never existed, I was finally standing in front of the truth. My fingers brushed the doorknob. Inside, I heard laughter, light, feminine, and young. Then a girl's voice, sweet and carefree. "Dad, someone's at the door." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The door creaked open. A girl no older than 13 stood before me, her hair curly and brown, her eyes, my God, the same shade as Thomas's. Behind her, footsteps approached. Heavy, familiar. And that's when I saw him. Standing in the doorway, frozen color draining from his face. He didn't need to say a word. The truth was already there, standing right beside him, calling him Dad. That's how my journey ended. Not with a confession, but with a door that finally opened. The bus hissed to a stop under the Texas sun. It was Saturday noon, hot enough to blur the horizon. The air smelled of dust and gasoline, and somewhere nearby wind chimes sang a tune I didn't recognize. I stepped down, clutching my small suitcase, heart pounding like it already knew what waited ahead. The address from the envelope was written neatly on a folded note, 124 Maple Street. Sylvia Parker Tailoring. I followed the narrow sidewalk until the neighborhood grew quiet rows of small houses painted in pastel colors, lawns trimmed with care, the kind of place where secrets could hide behind lace curtains. And then I saw it. A 2-story yellow house, bright and calm, with white shutters and a wooden porch swing. The sign on the gate read, "Sylvia Parker Tailoring." There were flowers on the steps, pink petunias in clay pots, and a faint hum of a radio drifting from inside, the sound of a life being lived, warm, domestic, untouched by guilt. I stood there for a long time. My palms were sweating, my legs stiff, my mind begging me to walk away, to let the lie stay beautiful. But lies have a scent, and once you smell them, you can never breathe easy again. So I climbed the steps and knocked. The door opened almost at once. Standing before me was a young girl, maybe 13. Curly brown hair, freckles, a cotton dress dotted with tiny blue flowers. Her smile was polite, but her eyes, those eyes, they stopped me cold. Because they were his. The same color, the same quiet spark. Eyes I had seen every morning for 13 years. "Hi, ma'am," she said cheerfully. "Mom's out, but Dad's home." The word Dad hit me like a stone dropped into still water. It rippled through every memory, every morning, every lie. I tried to answer, but my mouth had forgotten how. The girl tilted her head. "Would you like to wait inside?" Before I could speak, footsteps sounded from the hallway. And there he was. Thomas. He froze when he saw me, hand still on the doorframe, color draining from his face, like someone had pulled the sun out of the sky. For a second, neither of us breathed. Only the ceiling fan hummed lazy and cruel, spinning above a life I was never meant to see. "Maggie," he whispered, as if my name were something fragile that might shatter the air. The girl looked up at him, confused. "Dad, who is she?" Before he could answer, another voice came from deeper in the house, warm light, unaware of the storm about to break. "Honey, I found the lace for Mrs. Green's dress." A woman stepped into the doorway holding a basket of fabric. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw me. Her fingers loosened. The basket slid from her hands, spools of thread rolling across the wooden floor. Sylvia Parker. The name on the envelope. The handwriting on the birthday card. The woman who had been living the other half of my husband's life. For a moment, no one spoke. 3 people frozen in a room filled with the sound of a ticking clock. The girl's eyes moved between us, too young to understand what had just cracked open in her world. I reached into my purse, pulled out the birthday card, and placed it gently on the sewing table. The card that had changed everything. The proof I didn't need but carried anyway. The air grew heavy, so thick I could hear my own heartbeat echo inside my ears. Thomas took a step forward. "Maggie, please," Don't I said quietly. My voice surprised even me, steady cold, the sound of someone who had stopped breaking. I looked at Sylvia, who stood pale and trembling by the door, and then back at the man who had once been my world. "You don't have to explain," I said. "I already know." Sylvia's lips parted. "Who are you?" she whispered. I turned toward her. "I'm his legal wife." I let the words sink in, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. Then I added softly, "And I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fan seemed to stop spinning. Sylvia's face went white. Thomas's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked smaller somehow, the confident man I'd known replaced by a stranger caught between 2 collapsing worlds. I felt no victory, no anger, no tears. Only an eerie calm, the kind that comes when the storm finally reveals its center. For 13 years I had been living inside a lie so carefully built that it almost felt real. And now standing in that yellow house, I could finally see every piece of it, the love, the betrayal, the illusion of decency. "You didn't just lie to me," I said quietly. "You lied to her, to us, to that child." The girl looked at me frightened. I softened my voice. "Sweetheart, it's not your fault." Sylvia sank onto the nearest chair, hands covering her mouth. Her voice cracked when she whispered, "Thomas, is it true?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth was written on every inch of his face. I turned toward the door. "I'll be leaving now," I said. I just needed to see it with my own eyes. Thomas reached out as if to stop me. "Maggie, please." I stepped back. "Don't touch me. You've done enough." I looked at Sylvia one last time. "Take care of your daughter," I said, "and take care of yourself. He won't." Then I walked out into the blinding afternoon light. The heat hit me like fire, but it was cleaner than the air I'd been breathing inside that house. As I stood on the sidewalk, I looked up at the sign again, Sylvia Parker Tailoring. A beautiful name for a place built on deception. For years I had wondered where my husband went when he wasn't coming home. Now I knew. I didn't cry. Not that day. Tears would have been too kind. Instead, I walked to the corner, bought a ticket back to Kansas, and sat alone on the bench watching the yellow house grow smaller behind me. I remember thinking there are moments that divide your life before the truth and after it. And standing there under the Texas sun, I knew I had just crossed that line forever. I wasn't the same woman who'd left home. I wasn't the trusting wife of Thomas Davis anymore. From that moment on, I was something else, a woman who had seen the truth with her own eyes and survived it. The hours after that moment felt unreal. The sunlight through the curtains, the hum of the ceiling fan, the faint smell of fabric and perfume, everything continued as if nothing had happened. But inside that yellow house, 3 lives had already fallen apart. Thomas stood by the sewing table, his hands shaking the birthday card still lying between us like a blade neither of us dared to touch. Sylvia sat slumped in a chair, eyes wide, her breath short and uneven. The girl had been sent to a neighbor's house. Thank God she hadn't seen what came next. I waited. I didn't speak. Silence has a way of stripping a man bare. And finally Thomas broke. "Maggie," he said quietly, "I never meant for any of this to happen." I kept my voice level. "You never meant to marry 2 women." He rubbed his face with both hands like he could erase the years if he just pressed hard enough. Then the words spilled out, slow, hoarse, defeated. "It started before you, before everything. I married Sylvia first. We were young. And she got pregnant. I went to war right after. When I came home, I couldn't face what I'd become or what I'd lost. I met you in Kansas. You were light, you were peace. I thought I could start over." "So you didn't start over," I said. "You started again." He nodded miserably. "I kept both lives because I didn't know which one was real anymore." That was the truth of it. He wasn't a monster, just a coward, the kind that destroys everything by refusing to choose. I looked at Sylvia. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. "You said you were divorced," she whispered. You told me she was dead." Thomas didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said everything. Then came the final wound, the one that made all the others bleed. "The money I asked for your brother, the one you said lost a leg in the war." He swallowed hard. "It was for Sylvia and Emma." The room tilted. For 13 years I had mailed envelopes of mercy to a ghost that never existed. Every dollar had been a brick in the house that stood before me now. Sylvia covered her face and sobbed a sound so raw it seemed to tear the air apart. But I didn't move. I had no tears left. Only the quiet understanding that my entire marriage had been built on someone else's address. Thomas reached out, voice breaking. "Maggie, please, I can fix this." "No," I said. "You can't fix what was never real." He took a step toward me, but I stepped back, holding my ground. I could feel the strength returning, not anger, not revenge, just the solid, steady weight of clarity. "When you go back to Kansas," I said slowly, "I want you to pack your things and leave." He stared at me as if he hadn't heard. "What?" "You heard me. You'll leave the house. I won't explain anything to the neighbors. I won't waste another breath defending you. I'll raise our children, and I'll rebuild my life without your lies." My words fell heavy in the quiet, each one closing a door that would never open again. Sylvia lifted her head, eyes red. "Where will you go?" she asked softly. "Home," I said, "to the place where I still have my name." I turned back to Thomas. He looked older, suddenly, smaller, as if the weight of two worlds had finally crushed him. He whispered, "I loved you, Maggie." "No," I said. "You loved yourself in two different mirrors. You just liked the reflection I gave you better." For a long moment, none of us spoke. The yellow walls seemed to glow brighter, as if mocking the darkness between us. Outside, a lawnmower buzzed somewhere down the street, ordinary life continuing while ours fell apart. I picked up my purse, turned to leave. At the doorway, I paused. "Sylvia," I said quietly, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but you deserve to know the truth as much as I did." She nodded, weakly, tears sliding down her cheeks. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I looked back at the man who had once been my whole world. "I'm going to stand up," I said. "That's what women like us do." Then I stepped outside. The afternoon light hit me full in the face, warm and blinding, the kind of light that feels like a rebirth. Behind me, the yellow house stood still and silent, its pretty curtains fluttering like the last breath of a lie. I walked down the street without looking back. Every step felt heavy, but also new, like the first steps of someone learning to live again. They say heartbreak makes you weak, but standing there with nothing left but truth, I realized it can also make you unbreakable. For the first time in years, I wasn't the woman waiting by the window. I was the woman walking away. And I promised myself I would never let another man decide how much I was worth. When I came back to Kansas, the house was quiet. No truck in the driveway, no boots by the door, no voice calling, "Honey, I'm home." Thomas was gone. Not a letter, not a word, not a trace. Just like that, the man who had filled my world for 13 years disappeared, leaving me with 3 children, and another on the way. For the first few weeks, I moved through the days like a ghost. I'd wake before dawn, sit by the kitchen window, and watch the light crawl across the table where he used to drink his coffee. Sometimes I'd hear the echo of his laughter in the hallway and almost call out his name, then remember, grief isn't loud, it's quiet. It's the sound of a sewing machine in an empty room, the click of a needle through fabric, the rhythm of someone trying to stitch their heart back together. I had no money left, no family nearby, but I had my hands. And I had 3 little faces who still needed me to stand. So I began to sew. At first it was for neighbors, a ripped sleeve, a torn curtain, a hem that needed fixing. They'd pay me in coins sometimes, in eggs or bread. And every night after putting the children to bed, I'd sit under the dim light and work until my fingers ached. Some nights I cried so hard I could barely see the stitches. Other nights the tears dried before they reached my chin, but the thread never stopped. That sound, steady, endless, became my prayer. By winter, the neighbors started coming back, not for repairs, but for something new. "Could you make me a table runner? Do you sew pillow covers? Can you design curtains for the parlor?" And that's how it began, not with a grand plan, but with small requests, pieces of fabric, and fragments of courage. I rented a tiny stall in the town market, just enough space for a sewing table and a wooden shelf. While other women sold clothes, I sold comfort things that made a house feel like home. Curtains, tablecloths, embroidered napkins, simple things, but full of love. I called the stall Home Haven, because that's what I was trying to build, a haven not just for customers, but for myself. People liked the name. They liked that every stitch had a story behind it. Soon, my stall became a small business. Not much, but enough to keep food on the table, enough to pay the bills without begging for help. There were nights when I fell asleep at the machine hands, still holding the fabric, dreaming of a future that didn't depend on anyone else. For the first time in years, the house felt like mine. Then one afternoon the phone rang. It was a voice I hadn't heard in months. "Maggie," Sylvia said softly. "He's gone." Thomas left. He took everything. For a moment I said nothing. I looked around the room at the children's drawings on the fridge, at the half-finished curtains on the table, at the sunlight pooling on the floor. Somewhere deep inside, I had known this call would come. "Where are you?" I asked. "Houston," she whispered. "I can't pay rent. Emma's sick. I don't know what to do." There was a long silence between us, two women, both betrayed by the same man, standing on opposite ends of the same heartbreak. Finally, I said, "Bring your daughter to Kansas. I'll find you a job." She didn't answer right away. Then I heard her crying. Not the broken kind of crying, the kind that sounds like relief. When she arrived a week later, she looked thinner, paler, but her eyes still held that quiet fire I remembered. Little Emma clung to her skirt, shy but smiling when she saw my children. It struck me then how strange life could be. Our kids were half-siblings, but they didn't know it. And maybe they didn't need to. I helped Sylvia settle into a small apartment down the street. The next day I brought her to the market, to my little stall with its fading sign, Home Haven. "I can't pay you much," I said, "but I can teach you how to sew." She nodded. "I can learn. I just need to start somewhere." We stood there for a moment, two women who had every reason to hate each other, and instead we chose to build something together. That afternoon, while threading her first needle, Sylvia looked up and said quietly, "I used to think you were the villain in my story." I smiled. "Funny. I used to think the same about you." We both laughed, tired, fragile laughter, but real, the kind that belongs to survivors. In the weeks that followed, we worked side by side, me teaching her patterns and stitches, her teaching me patience and grace. We shared coffee tears, silence, and dreams. And little by little, Home Haven began to grow. People noticed the beauty in what we made. Maybe they could feel the story sewn into every piece, a story about women who refused to stay broken. By spring, we were making more than curtains. We were making a life. One stitch, one sale, one sunrise at a time. Sometimes at night, I'd watch Sylvia help Emma with homework, and I'd think of Thomas somewhere out there, chasing the same ghosts that had ruined him. But I felt no anger anymore, only distance, like he belonged to a different world entirely. We were no longer the women he left behind. We were the women who stood back up. And as I locked the shop one evening, the sign above the door catching the last light of the day, I whispered to myself, he thought he took everything, but he only taught us how to begin again. By the following autumn, Home Haven was no longer just a stall in the market. It had become a small shop on Maple Street, the kind of place that smelled of fabric, coffee, and quiet hope. Every morning, the bell above the door chimed softly, and with it came a sense of beginning again. Sylvia had moved to Wichita, renting a modest room just a few blocks from my house. It wasn't much, a single window, a small bed, a vase of wildflowers on the table, but it was hers, and that mattered more than space or luxury. Emma started school with my children. They walked together every morning, backpacks swinging, their laughter echoing down the street. Life was finally steady. For the first time, two women once tied to the same betrayal were learning to build something together instead of tearing each other apart. Sylvia became my sales manager, though neither of us knew what that title truly meant in those early days. She had an instinct for people, how to greet them, how to read what they needed before they spoke. I handled production, designing, stitching, managing supplies. She handled customers' orders and deliveries. Where I was cautious, she was bold. Where I hesitated, she smiled and said, "Let's just try." Our partnership fit like two pieces of fabric cut from different patterns, but sewn into the same beautiful quilt. On quiet evenings after closing, we'd share tea in the back room. The sewing machines would sit silent, and for the first time in years, we would allow ourselves to breathe, not as rivals, not as survivors, but as women rebuilding from the same ashes. I taught Sylvia how to keep the books, how to read the ledgers, calculate margins, and track every dollar that came through the door. She'd frown at the numbers at first, then laugh and say, "I swear, Maggie, I'd rather face a thunderstorm than balance a column." But she learned quickly, and in return she taught me something I'd never known before, how to choose fabric from abroad, soft linens from France, vibrant cotton from India, threads that caught the light like whispers. "People don't just buy fabric," she said one day. "They buy the feeling of home. If it looks good, it sells. If it feels good, they stay." She was right. Under her eye, the shop transformed. Colors filled the windows, pale blues, warm creams, floral prints that made strangers stop and smile. Home Haven began to grow, and so did we. Our children, John and Emma, became inseparable. They did homework at the counter while we worked late, their laughter mixing with the hum of the sewing machines. When customers came in, Emma would rush to help fold fabrics, and John would proudly hand out flyers he'd drawn himself. It was strange sometimes watching them together, the daughter of the woman my husband betrayed me with, and the son of the woman he abandoned. Yet there they were, proof that innocence can heal what guilt destroys. The neighbors started noticing us too. They no longer whispered behind hands when they passed the shop. They came in curious, impressed, supportive. One afternoon, Mrs. Clark from the bakery next door stopped by with a basket of muffins. "I don't know how you two do it," she said. "Most women would have torn each other apart. But look at you business partners." Sylvia smiled. "We did tear each other apart," she said lightly. "We just decided to stitch ourselves back together afterward." We laughed, because it was true. The laughter didn't erase the past, but it softened it. Some nights when the shop lights dimmed, I'd see Sylvia staring at the window reflection at her own face, older now, lined with quiet strength. I knew what she was thinking because I thought it too. We survived him. Home Haven began attracting attention beyond Wichita. Boutiques from Topeka and Kansas City called to place bulk orders. Our pattern's handmade curtains with delicate lace borders became a signature style. Each piece carried a small stitched label made by Home Haven, crafted by women who endure. It wasn't marketing, it was a truth we'd earned. One rainy evening as we locked the door, Sylvia turned to me. "Do you ever miss him?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. The smell of wet pavement drifted in the air, thick with memory. "Sometimes I miss who I thought he was," I said. "But the man himself, no. He's gone long before he left." She nodded slowly. "I used to wait for him to come back. Now I hope he never does." We didn't talk about Thomas again. Not because we forgot, but because the life we were building didn't need his name in it anymore. Weeks turned into months, and the two of us grew into something unexpected. Not partners, not rivals, but sisters by survival. We shared recipes, birthday secrets. When I was too tired to sew, Sylvia brought soup. When she was too overwhelmed to face the books, I finished them for her. One evening after closing, Emma ran up holding 2 scraps of fabric. "Mom, Miss Maggie. Look, if you sew these together, they make a heart." She held them up proudly, the stitches uneven but honest. Sylvia looked at me, tears forming. "Seems like our kids understand better than we ever did." I smiled. "Maybe that's how it should be." The rain started again, soft and steady. Inside, the light from our sewing lamps spilled across the room, 2 women once broken now whole in the glow of their work. As I watched Sylvia thread her needle, I realized something simple and profound. Forgiveness doesn't always mean letting go of the past. Sometimes it means turning the pain into partnership and the betrayal into purpose. We had stitched our wounds into fabric, and somewhere between the threads we found friendship. By the spring of 1986, the past finally stopped knocking. Home Haven was thriving. The children were healthy, and for the first time in years, I could breathe without waiting for something to break. But justice, real quiet, lasting justice, was still unfinished business. One gray morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold and a stack of legal papers in front of me. Across the top of the first page in bold black letters were the words, "Petition for divorce, grounds bigamy." I ran my fingers across the ink, steady but trembling inside. 13 years of silence, 13 years of trust turned into paperwork. It felt surreal writing my name where his had once stood beside mine. When I first walked into the courthouse, the clerk looked up and said kindly, "Ma'am, are you sure you want to proceed? Cases like these can take months." "I've already waited 13 years, I said. "I can wait a few more if it means the truth is finally on record." And so I filed the petition. My lawyer, Mr. Langford, was an old-fashioned man with a voice like gravel and a heart surprisingly gentle. He listened, nodded slowly, and said, "We'll use bigamy as grounds. If we can prove he was married to both you and Mrs. Parker at the same time, you can claim full property rights." "I don't want vengeance," I told him. "I just want what's mine." He smiled faintly. "That's what justice usually is." Mrs. Davis getting back the pieces someone took without asking. The hearing took months. Thomas never appeared. He sent no lawyer, no letter, no defense, as if cowardice had become his last address. But the evidence spoke for itself. The marriage certificates, the financial transfers, the years of deception. Even the judge, a man known for his indifference, looked at me with something almost like respect. When the final rulings came, Mr. Langford called me at the shop. I still remember the sound of his voice over the hum of the sewing machines. "It's done," he said. "The court has ruled in your favor. All property in Kansas is legally yours. He's been stripped of ownership, every penny, every asset. It's over, Mrs. Davis." For a moment I didn't speak. Then I whispered, "No, Mr. Langford, it's finally beginning." That evening I walked home through the cool air of early autumn. Leaves rustled under my shoes, the same golden shade as the sign above our door, Home Haven. The shop glowed from inside, Sylvia adjusting the display, Emma and John finishing their homework. I stood on the sidewalk watching the light spill through the window and realized this was mine. All of it. Not as a wife, but as a woman who had built something from ruin. A week later, I filed new papers, Home Haven Interiors, LLC. Our little market stall had become a registered company official, legal and strong. When the registration certificate arrived in the mail, I hung it in a simple wooden frame by the door. It wasn't just a document. It was a declaration of existence. From that day on, every invoice, every contract, every signature carried my name alone. Margaret Davis, founder and owner. It was the most beautiful revenge I could have imagined. Not anger, not bitterness, but ownership. 1 year later, fate smiled in a way that almost felt like poetry. Sylvia burst through the shop door, papers in hand, breathless with excitement. "Maggie, you're not going to believe this. The Harper Trucking Company wants to place an order." I froze. The name was familiar. Too familiar. The same company Thomas had worked for all those years. The same company that had called me the day the truth first cracked open. "They need custom curtains for their offices and employee lodges," Sylvia continued. "They said our work is the best in the Midwest." I smiled slowly. "Then let's give them our best." A month later, we drove to the Harper Trucking headquarters in Topeka to sign the contract. The building was cold, corporate, filled with the smell of fresh paint and coffee. As I sat at the conference table, pen in hand, I noticed the empty chair across from me, the one where he used to sit for meetings just like this. For a moment, I could almost hear his voice, charming, confident, lying through his teeth. Then I signed my name slowly, deliberately across the line where his once belonged. When the ink dried, I closed the folder and said quietly, "Revenge isn't yelling, it's signing your name where his used to be." Sylvia looked at me and smiled, half in awe, half in understanding. Neither of us spoke for a while. Outside, the sun was setting over the Kansas sky, washing the city in gold and rose. For once, the past didn't hurt to look at. The contract with Harper Trucking opened new doors for Home Haven Interiors. Our designs appeared in magazines, our orders doubled, and people started calling us the women who built beauty out of betrayal. But to me, it was never about revenge in the loud sense of the word. It was about rewriting the story, turning a man's lie into a woman's legacy. Sometimes late at night, I'd run my hand over the company seal on our documents and think how strange it is the way justice works. It doesn't always arrive in courtrooms or arguments. Sometimes it comes in the form of a signature, a business, a life well lived. I didn't need an apology from Thomas. The world had already given me something better, his absence, and the space to fill it with my own name. Success, I learned, has its own kind of silence. Not the soft, peaceful kind, but the heavy one that waits behind every victory, as if testing how long you can stand before the next storm begins. By 1990, Home Haven Interiors was known across the Midwest. Our designs filled hotels, offices, family homes. We had 20 employees, steady contracts, and a line of loyal customers who believed in our story. From the outside, it looked like everything we had ever dreamed of. But behind the beautiful storefront windows, the numbers were changing. The world was changing. The financial crisis came like a wind that no one saw coming. 1 month orders slowed. The next invoices were delayed. Within 6 months, half our clients had closed their own businesses. Money stopped moving, and so did hope. I remember standing in the middle of the workshop one night, machines quiet, shelves, half empty, and thinking how strange it was that success could disappear so quietly. Sylvia tried to stay optimistic. "We've survived worse, Maggie," she said with that same stubborn light in her eyes. "We'll sew our way out of this mess, too." But the light in her eyes was dimming in ways I couldn't ignore. She'd been coughing for months, dry, sharp, relentless. At first, she blamed the dust from the fabrics. Then the doctor called it what it was, lung cancer. I still remember the day she told me. We were sitting on the back porch, the air cool and still. She tried to smile, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she never drank. "Looks like my body finally wants a vacation," she said, forcing a laugh. I didn't laugh. I couldn't. I reached across the table, took her hand and said, "Then I'll run the shop, you just rest." But she shook her head gently. "Don't you dare slow down because of me, Maggie. This place, it's ours. Keep it alive." And I did. I took over her clients, doubled the hours, and brought her samples to the hospital so she could still feel part of the work. Some days she'd hold a swatch of fabric against her cheek and say, "This one feels like summer." Other days she was too weak to speak at all. The business staggered, but never fell. We sold what we could, saved what we had, and kept the lights on. I learned that survival isn't always about profit. Sometimes it's about love and action, a friendship turned into fuel strong enough to keep a dream breathing. As the months passed, the illness spread. Her once steady hands trembled when she tried to thread a needle. I started bringing soup instead of invoices, stories instead of stress. At night, when the pain took her voice, I'd sit by her bedside and read from our old ledger the story of two women who turned betrayal into business. She'd smile weakly and whisper, "We did good, didn't we?" And I'd say, "Better than good. We built something that will outlive us both." Her daughter Emma visited every day after school. Sweet, quiet Emma, 16, then already showing her mother's gentle strength. I could see Sylvia watching her with the same fear and pride that all mothers carry when they know time is running short. One evening, as the sun was setting, Sylvia reached for my hand. Her skin was paper-thin, warm, trembling. She looked at me and said softly, "The day you walked into my shop, I thought my life ended. Now I know it just began." I wanted to speak to tell her that she'd saved me just as much as I'd saved her, but the words wouldn't come. So I just held her hand and we sat there, two women who had lost everything once and somehow found family in each other. A few days later, she was gone, peaceful, quiet. Just the sound of the rain against the window, like the world was sewing her name into the sky. At her funeral, the church was full. Clients, neighbors, seamstresses, even strangers. People who had been touched by her kindness, her strength, her laughter. Emma stood beside me, clutching my hand, and I realized something deep and simple. I had promised to take care of her mother's dream, but now I had to take care of her. That night, as the house emptied and the candles flickered low, Emma came to me. "Mom said you'd look after me," she whispered. "She said I'd never be alone." I knelt down, cupping her face in my hands. "You're not alone, sweetheart," I said. "You're home." From that day on, she became part of my family, not out of pity, but out of love, born from shared loss. The kids adored her, and she grew into the woman Sylvia had hoped she would be: kind, creative, steady. Years later, when I'd walk into the shop and see Emma bent over the sewing machine, her hair catching the same golden light that used to fall on Sylvia, I'd smile and whisper to myself, "We didn't lose her. We just changed where she lives." The business recovered slowly after that. Clients returned, the market stabilized, and Home Haven found its balance again. But nothing ever felt quite the same because part of its heartbeat now lived in memory. Sometimes late at night, I still hear Sylvia's laugh and the hum of the machines, or her advice echoing in my head. If it feels like home, it will always sell. She was right, of course. But she was talking about more than curtains or furniture. She meant love, trust, friendship, the invisible things that hold the real world together. And so every morning when I unlock the door to Home Haven Interiors, I whisper the same words I told her that final night. We built something that will outlive us both. Time moves differently when you've already lived a few lifetimes inside one heart. The years after Sylvia's passing came quietly, not with sorrow, but with purpose. Because sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to keep the dream they loved alive. Home Haven Interiors kept growing not through luck, but through love and legacy. We rebuilt, expanded, and found our rhythm again. People stopped calling us that women's shop and started calling us what we were, a brand built by women who refused to break. By the late 90s, our work was everywhere, from the small houses of Wichita to hotels in Kansas City, from family kitchens to elegant offices across the Midwest. We became known for warmth, simplicity, and the subtle beauty of hand-sewn details. Every curtain, every tablecloth, every embroidered pillow carried a story. And behind each one, the same signature still stood: Home Haven Interiors, built from the hands of two women. The best part wasn't the success. It was seeing how the next generation took what we started and made it something bigger. John, my eldest, became an interior design engineer. He inherited his father's precision, but with my patience and my refusal to leave anything unfinished. He designed spaces that didn't just look beautiful. They felt like they could breathe. Emma. Sylvia's daughter. My daughter now grew into a creative force. Her mind saw color the way a poet sees words. She became creative director of Home Haven, transforming it into a modern brand that still carried the heart of its origins. Sometimes when I watched her move through the studio, sketching new patterns, talking with clients, laughing, I could see Sylvia in the curve of her smile. It never made me sad. It made me proud. Sarah, my youngest, had always been the fiercest. She studied law, fueled by the quiet rage of watching her mother rebuild from betrayal. She became a lawyer for women's rights, fighting for fairness, for safety, for dignity, for every woman who'd been silenced and told to stay small. And Daniel, my gentle boy, found his strength in words. He became our marketing director, the storyteller of our brand, turning our pain, our perseverance, and our joy into messages that reached hearts. He used to say, "Mom, people don't buy fabric. They buy the story sewn into it." He was right. Together, they ran the company like a family because it was one. The children of two women who were once enemies now worked side by side, laughing in the same office where their mothers once cried. Sometimes I'd walk through the headquarters, quietly listening to the hum of the machines, the sound of typing, the rhythm of scissors through cloth, and I'd think, this is the sound of forgiveness. In 2003, the news came. A letter from Texas. Thomas Davis had died in a truck accident on a deserted road outside Houston. No funeral, no family, no one to claim the body for days. I read the letter in silence. The paper trembled slightly in my hand, but my heart didn't. I simply whispered, "May he rest wherever he was hiding." Then I folded the letter and placed it in a box, the same one that still held the old birthday card. I didn't keep it out of bitterness. I kept it as a reminder that even the cruelest truths can bloom into something beautiful if you have the courage to keep living after them. Years passed. The shop became an office, then a company, then a community. Home Haven Interiors began offering scholarships to young women in design. We opened workshops, taught skills, built futures. Our slogan changed, but our mission never did. At 75, I still came to the office every morning, tea in hand, notebook under my arm, watching the next generation carry the torch. The world had changed, but some things like honesty, craftsmanship, and love never go out of style. That's when my grandson, always curious, asked me one day, "Grandma, why did you name it Home Haven?" I smiled. "Because home isn't a place, sweetheart. It's something you build with your own hands when life takes everything else away." He didn't fully understand, not yet, but one day he will. In that same year, Emma came to me with an idea. "Mom," she said, "we should tell your story. Not just the business story, your story. People need to hear it." And so we did. We started a small YouTube channel, The Grandma's Diary. It was meant to be a storytelling project, a place to share lessons, a voice for women who had endured, rebuilt, and risen. I never expected anyone to listen, but they did. Thousands, then tens of thousands, then more. So here I am, 75 years old, sitting by the same sewing machine I started with, telling my story to a world I never imagined would care. I look into the camera and say, I didn't break things, I built them. I didn't scream or curse or burn what hurt me. I built my own empire instead. Then I pause, letting the silence breathe, because silence carries more power than noise ever could. Revenge, I say softly, isn't about making someone else hurt. It's about building a life so strong they can never hurt you again. The comments flood in from women and men from all corners of the world. They say things like, I needed this today. My mother lived this story. Thank you for reminding us that dignity can be the loudest form of justice. And I smile, because that's all I ever wanted, for the pain to mean something, for the story to live beyond me. Now every Sunday the children gather at my house. The air smells of cinnamon and fresh bread, the same way it used to when life was simpler. John brings designs for new collections. Emma talks about color palettes. Sarah updates us on the women she's helped that week. Daniel takes photos, planning the next campaign. And I sit there watching, listening to the laughter of a family built from broken pieces and feeling whole. I often think back to that day in 1981 when I found the birthday card in his coat pocket. It took me half a lifetime to understand that the worst moments in life can sometimes plant the seeds for everything beautiful that comes after. Because every stitch, every tear, every scar is part of the same design. And when people ask me now, Margaret, How did you get your revenge? I tell them, by living long enough to see my name on the door and peace in my heart. Then I smile at the camera and close the diary. If this story touched your heart, hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment where you're watching. Because sometimes, women's justice doesn't need fire or fury, just a birthday card and a pair of steady hands.